Hello and welcome to Seeing Red, the first episode of a brand new Unofficial Arsenal podcast with myself, Arsenal reporter Tom Canton, and the chief football writer at The Mirror, John Cross. How you doing, mate? You good, you well?
Yeah, good. Really looking forward to this, Tom.
Yeah, it's our first episode. You may have seen our primer or promo episode that we did last week, giving you a little bit of a taste of what to expect from this new show. But if you haven't seen that, obviously go back and watch it. But in essence, myself and John are talking about Arsenal from the coverage of them home and away in the Premier League and the Champions League. And of course, in those times where there isn't any football on, there'll be plenty of transfer chat around, I'm sure, and updates on injuries and international breaks, which is, of course, what we are currently in right now. And we're recording this minutes after John has just landed back from Albania, covering England's match out there, of course, and was also covering the first England game as well, which we saw two Arsenal players divulge their scoring talents as well, which we'll be talking about. But John, how was your trip? Was it a good experience in Tirana?
Yeah, it was good. I can't remember the last time I went. I've definitely been before because I almost tick off these countries that I go to. And what a lovely city. I do enjoy it. It was lovely. I cannot believe that basically I've left there, sunshine, 20 degrees plus, warmth. It felt like balmy, sort of kind of nice, almost late summer, sort of afternoons and evenings, really. Returned to London and it's freezing. I can't believe it.
You say you can't believe it, but you can really believe it. So.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it has been unseasonably mild, so who am I to complain? But it was a good trip, and I do like to go and see those kind of slightly different places. I know a lot of people go to Albania. It's becoming a bit of a gem for tourism now, and sort of holidays and such forth. And I can see exactly why. Lovely.
Yeah, I know a few friends have been out there for some music festivals in the past and have had a great time as well. So yes, it tracks the experiences I'm hearing from it. Of course, England played two matches over this international break. They beat Serbia 2-0 and of course repeated that scoreline in Tirana yesterday or the day before, of course, that we're recording this, and this will be coming out for you, we imagine, on Tuesday. So if you are indeed a listener and you're enjoying the content, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and leave a review as well. Let us know what we're doing right, hopefully more than we're doing wrong. But we're going to kick off, of course, with that win over Serbia, because it does have quite a significant Arsenal focus with both of Bukayo, Saka and Eberechi getting on the score sheet. So, John, it was all about that Phil Foden pass, apparently, rather than anything else, if you've been following the media tunes around this. It was set on a plate, I think was the wording for Eza. But a brilliant.
What, the 3-yard pass forward? No.
Yeah, that's the discussion. That's how it was described in the commentary I was listening to anyway. But what a finish by both players on the afternoon.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I love Bukayo Saka so much. He just embodies everything that I think, I really like about sort of kind of the modern day football. He's incredibly efficient. His decision making is absolutely second to none, and it always has been. Incredible maturity and game intelligence, way beyond his years. I think a fantastic player, and you can't help. I just think he's got this lovely infectious smile as well. Just comes across, and whenever we've spoken to him, Tom, he comes across as such a nice guy, doesn't he? And basically, I view him. He's obviously captained Arsenal on occasion in the absence of Martin Odegaard. I can see him. He's already part of the England leadership group. I can see him being potential for permanent Arsenal captain and also indeed England captain in the future. I really think he's got that leadership. He's also got amazing technique, which he showed in abundance to kind of really guide that wonderful shot and that volley back across goal to give Arsenal it was a victory by Arsenal and sort of England the lead, and it was just a beautiful piece of technique. I thought he was by far and away the best player on the pitch overall in the game. Just did everything right. Everything came off for him. It was lovely. It was really good to see, and it showed just how an important player he is, I think, for England. I do think Eze's kind of I do know what you mean. I actually saw Lee Dixon at the airport today this morning. I should have raised it with him, but I didn't actually hear it myself. I've read a lot about it, so I'm very much aware of it. Even my colleague Andy Dunn wrote about it and said, "Are you sure? What a great goal!" Because it was a beaut, wasn't it? It was an absolute beaut. I guess in wearing my journalism hat, there's been so much focus on Foden and Bellingham, and also where they can play on Kane. I guess they were talking actually in commentary about Foden, which would be my assumption a little bit more.
Yeah, there was. And I think it was the Sky tweet was put it on a plate for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was a beauty, wasn't it? I think
yeah.
Eze's got such a lovely technique, and basically he's got kind of almost got that. He looks a little bit laid back on the pitch.
Yeah.
But then when the ball kind of comes near him, the kind of this radar goes up, and he just looks as if he owns it, and he's got a lovely style, and that sort of kind of, I don't know, that sort of rangy runs that he makes, and the way that he controls and guards and protects the ball. He's got beautiful technique. He is a lovely, elegant, beautiful player, I think, and the way that he just swept that in. It's a really interesting time, I think, for Eze with England, because he's obviously gone to the Euros last year, and he has got this. Then he started on the left, in Albania. It's quite interesting, I think. It's a really good topic of discussion, because where does he fit into the equation? Does he go as is he playing for a number 10 role? If he is, he's got a hell of a lot of competition. Or is he playing to be on the left? And therefore he might arguably be behind Gordon and Rashford.
Yes.
Strong competition on both, although he has the great asset of being able to play in both positions. So that would give him an edge. But I do think he's one that he needs a big season for Arsenal to absolutely guarantee, a World Cup spot. We all know that, he's absolutely got the talent to be there. But basically, he's kind of, which is a good thing for Arsenal, really. He's got absolutely nailed it this season to be sure of his place in another major tournament, of which there can be no doubt he's got the ability to hold that squad place, if you like.
Yeah, I thought the move to Arsenal from Palace, if anything, was going to do good things for his England career. Not just because he's playing for a club of a higher profile with respect to Palace, but more so because obviously England tend to come up against a lot of teams that will be defending more. And at Palace, he was playing a lot more in transition and obviously was benefiting from that kind of style. But moving to Arsenal, he's having to play in a system and in a style which is closer to that of England than it was, I think, for Palace. And so having that test against low blocks, I think, has been his biggest challenge this season, because his numbers obviously haven't been as prolific as they have been in the previous seasons with Palace, not just in terms of goals and assists, but also in terms of shots per game and entries into the opposition box per game and numbers like this. And that's natural, because obviously he's coming up against teams now that are dropping into lower mid blocks a lot more often than he was facing at Crystal Palace. I think that some fans maybe have been more expectant of Eze this season than what we've seen so far. Do you think that's just down to adaptation and time, and gradually he will find it, or is there any level of concern for you?
No, there's no level of concern. I must say one thing that really struck me was, and I'll be interested in your take on this as well, is that basically he arrived on the back of a remarkable campaign. It felt like a summer-long campaign from Arsenal fans to kind of get this guy, to sign this guy, because he really excited Arsenal fans. And basically everyone knows his sort of kind of Arsenal connections, Arsenal affection. And then basically, I guess, then what put the cherry on the cake was that basically, he's made this phone call to Mikel Arteta and said, any chance you could sign me so I don't have to go to Spurs? Yeah. He's just written his name into Arsenal folklore. But it's just, so it kind of built him up into this kind of legendary status, which is great.
Yeah.
But I felt the only thing I would say is that having seen him, there's no doubt about it, I think he made a really good case as one of the very best players, certainly in the top 10, I think, of the last sort of kind of 6 months, if you like. Because when you look at what Palace did, in winning the Cup, basically, then the start to the season, then obviously the Community Shield as well, his talent is not in doubt at all.
Yeah.
I do feel by the time Arsenal signed him, he'd been built up as the next Pele. And I think that basically a few people were getting a little bit carried away about where he is, what he can do. But I know, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Tom, I love an exciting player. This will come across in the pod, and basically in the course of the weeks. I love an exciting player who does something different, who gets you off your seat, and he does that. But I do think we've seen with England, particularly on sort of kind of consistently the bigger stage, is he at that level? Is he absolutely at that sort of kind of level now? He can certainly strive to get there, but I think in a way it was about, where is he right now? in my view, Arsenal have signed a player, and he's that little bit old as well. So, I think they've signed a player to be in his peak years, to grow over the next 2 seasons, this and next, and then really, kind of bring it home and be an absolutely fantastic, player. I think he's been a bit of a mixed bag. I don't know whether you'd agree.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically sometimes he's a little bit quieter in games, doesn't quite own them. Other times I think he looks really good, dangerous, goals, threat, creativity. Is he best in the 10? Is he better wide left? All those sort of things. And he hasn't quite owned it yet. But I personally have really liked what I've seen so far. I think there's so much promise there. But I do feel as if there's a little bit more to go. Well, more than a little bit, a lot more to come because of his sheer potential.
Yeah, I think over the last couple of seasons, beyond Saka, Arsenal have kind of lacked a maverick essence and a match-winning speciality moment. And Eza provided that so much for Palace, obviously, in big moments as well, in the FA Cup final, of course. And the goal he scored against his former club Palace is a great example of where he can kind of pop up on the edge of the box and just kind of half volley the ball into the back of the net. Arsenal win the game 1-0. Without that moment, they don't claim all 3 points. And so I think those points are going to be really big for Arsenal this season. I also think that Arteta, and he showed it in the game that Ødegaard suffered that knee injury against West Ham, where he started both Eza and Ødegaard together in midfield, with Declan Rice playing in his old number 6 role, with Zubimendi coming on for the injured Ødegaard and kind of restructuring the midfield to something more similar to what we've got used to. And he said afterwards that it's something that they wanted to try, and that obviously they didn't get the chance really because Ødegaard came off within the first half so early on in that game. And with Ødegaard coming back, I'm curious to see if again he returns to that midfield of Eza and Ødegaard together in games where you are at home to a side further down the table like West Ham, where you're going to have a lot more of the ball, a lot more low blocks, mid blocks that you're coming up against, and you can afford to kind of sacrifice one of Rice and Zubimendi to play the extra player alongside a Trossard on the left and Saka, and then one of the centre forwards as well. So, yeah, I think in some ways he's been a bit of a victim of Ødegaard's injury, but the irony of that being, of course, that when Ødegaard returns, he's arguably then got more competition, for that number 10 role. So it swings and roundabouts. I think that there is benefits and drawbacks for that scenario that's emerging, but there's no doubt in my mind that he was a player that Arsenal absolutely had to get through the door in the summer, and it was a big, opportunity that they got. It's totally right. The other game, of course, the weekend that I was in attendance for was Brazil's friendly against Senegal at the Emirates Stadium. I don't typically tend to go to Brazil friendlies. It is my second one because I went to the England-Brazil one a couple of years ago as well. But with it being at the Emirates, with it being an international break, I was like, I'm going to get my football fix and I'll head down thinking it'll be a nice afternoon, pretty chilled piece to do. I thought I'll do some player ratings around the London clubs that are involved. And, your Richarlison's Esteval, who had a great game, but Esteval with some talent, that kid.
Oh, he's amazing, isn't he? Absolutely.
Chelsea have got some talent there that I'm very concerned about. And I thought it was going to be this great afternoon of just kind of watching, some great footballers play, a frenetic match. The atmosphere was very unlike the Emirates. And I don't mean that as a slight to the Emirates at all. It's just when you got that culture of Brazil and Senegalese fans colliding, there was some really kind of chaotic moments within the ground. And you've got obviously fans sitting next to one another rather than being segregated. So that as well created something a little bit different. But the game got taken over by the narrative of Gabriel because he comes off injured just after half time. I think it was Natalie Gedra reporting for Sky that provided the information that in the Friday session, Gabriel had warmed up alone. She used the word warmed up, and a lot of people use the word he trained alone. But all we've got officially, unless you can provide any insight you've got, John, is that he warmed up in that session alone on Friday, and that there was a consciousness that his load going into the game had already been quite high, basically indicating that there was a risk potentially if he was to play that there could be an injury. Now, he did suffer that injury, and it's confirmed that he suffered a muscular problem. I spoke to Carlo Ancelotti after the game. I asked him about for an update, and he provided that, being that it wasn't a adductor issue that he was fearful of. He basically apologized and said, we're very sorry, and that we hope he comes back very quickly. I don't think that's going to fall on Arsenal fans' ears with any kind of gratitude. And the sense at the moment has been, why has this happened? How did this happen? And we've got to do something to stop this happening in the future. So just to get your kind of response and reactions to the news that we found, because you, of course, did report as well on Monday that the expectation is he'll be very unlikely to feature in the derby now.
Well, yeah, that was really based on, I did actually, speak to a Brazilian journalist on Sunday, basically, and then and then also did sort of kind of tap into that Brazilian statement as well from the Brazilian Federation, which made it clear that on Sunday, he'd had scans on the sort of kind of on the thigh, as they described it, and it confirmed a muscle issue. It's always a sort of a really tight one with the international call-ups, and I know few things annoy club fans and specifically Arsenal fans as kind of injuries on international duties, and with good reason, by the way, because you're bound to get frustrated, aren't you? Basically, when an injury can derail a player's season, or and indeed a sort of string of results. Martin Odegaard last year. I mean, did he ever really kind of have the opportunity to kind of get that run of games and fitness and rhythm back after that kind of suffering that injury? I would argue probably not. And I know that he was sort of kind of getting into a real groove, and he was very confident in pre-season, thought he was really set up nicely. And then, as luck would have it, then he has a sort of a setback. But look, I think sometimes we underestimate just how much the players want to play for their country.
Yes.
It used to be, I think, then that basically England would have a bit of a sort of a struggle sometimes to persuade players to report up. I think if you tap into the Brazil mindset, particularly, and a South American mindset, their passion for playing for their country is unparalleled. It really is. So they want to play. They are determined to play. It means so much to them. You see that in the kind of the celebration videos. And yes, it's a friendly. I get that. But then basically the competition is pretty high, and basically players want to stake a claim. Should a national manager be reckless with a player who's played a lot of minutes? Absolutely not. And basically, I do think it was clear that basically, sometimes you have to rest and rotate. But it does sometimes sort of kind of irk me. I was thinking, hang on a minute. What about the kind of, 70, 80 odd thousand at Wembley? What about the kind of, the huge crowd at the Emirates? People do love their international football. The players love it and they want to play. Should you then take risks on it? But you know yourself sometimes, Tom, that basically, players do have specific different training schedules.
Yes.
And just because maybe he's done something different from the rest of the group doesn't necessarily mean that actually, he had this sort of kind of, basically a sort of thigh or groin issue and then pulled it. And basically it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. So I do think it's a really interesting point. But I bet you that if you'd asked Gabriel on the Saturday morning, do you want to play? He would say yes every time, because basically he knows what's at stake. And so basically I think, it's worth, I think, bearing in mind, but he's such an important player, isn't he? That's the killer blow, I think, if he does miss games. One thing that someone was sort of kind of saying to me, when we were sort of chatting over thing, is that he does have this habit of kind of coming off in games and it looking bad, and you think, oh, he's going to be out for a while. Did he do something similar against Atletico Madrid?
He came off in that game. He also came off against Olympiacos as well. Around
you're thinking, oh gosh, I hope he's not injured. He played the next game. So I think he's basically he might be sort of kind of protect himself a little bit. But it is a frustrating one. It really is a frustrating one, particularly because. I guess the last thing that the Brazil want is for him to be injured as well, and they don't want to, have to sort of kind of send him back injured. And he didn't look great, did he, when he was sort of kind of hobbling towards the coach?
Yeah, he looked in discomfort. He kept on kind of holding his upper right leg on the inside, where obviously the adductor muscle is, and. From an Arsenal, obviously we both cover the club, but I don't mind saying to people that I'm very much an Arsenal fan. You can see it if you're watching with the Arsenal hoodie I'm wearing. I'm very much, my affiliation is with very public facing with the club. So journalist hat off, fan hat on. I'm apoplectic, mate. I'm fuming about this, because from my point of view, like, if there's knowledge and understanding that there's any level of concern, and this isn't a competitive fixture, which obviously it wasn't, that he shouldn't be risked. And also there's this argument as well with Brazil, with it being a World Cup year, that you want to protect your best assets. And for me, Gabriel is their best defender. in their squad. You know, they've got some talented players, absolutely. And Marquinhos next to him is another brilliant player. But the form that Gabriel's been in the last couple of seasons in particular has been massive. There's also two extra bits of nuance that I've kind of been digging into around today, around a lot of kind of clarity, I guess, around the power that clubs have when it comes to kind of blocking. Because back in the day, people referenced, you know, Sir Alex Ferguson pulling the likes of Nicky Butt out of England duty and things like this. Reality is these days is that power just doesn't really exist. And there was actually an incident in 2023 where Arsenal kind of were recommending that Gabriel Martinelli didn't join up with Brazil right before the November international break, I think, or the October international break, I think it was. And then in the game before the international break, he comes off the bench against Man City, scores the only goal and the winner in that game, still doesn't go on international duty because he's been, basically the recommendation has been that he shouldn't be called up. November international break comes around. Gabriel Jesus has been missing since that game where he scored in Seville when Arsenal won the game 2-1. And Brazil's manager at the time, I think Diniz that it was like, we're calling him up because we need to find out the real reason why he's, you know, why we're being told he shouldn't be called up. He went and it was assessed and he couldn't play. But there was kind of this element of, well, you said that about Martinelli and he's now, you know, playing and we've not called him up. So a month later, of course, there's that. So yeah, clubs, the power that clubs have isn't as stringent maybe as people think. And the other interesting story is that around 4 years ago, Gabriel actually turned down a call-up from Brazil because of the birth of his child. And an interesting interview that emerged months later from Juninho, who's basically been the national team coordinator, the Middlesbrough icon that many people remember, basically came out and hinted at the idea that decision to reject Brazil for the birth of his child had impacted future call-ups in a World Cup year. And Gabriel wasn't selected for the 2022 Qatar World Cup squad. And there were some interesting quotes from Juninho at the time where he talked about how he basically had missed a birth of his own child because he was playing, you know. And so if that's kind of impacted Gabriel's mentality and the idea that even for a friendly, even if he's not 100%, he has to give 100% commitment, especially with it being a World Cup year, I think that's definitely worth the inclusion and consideration in the narrative around his decision to still play. So I don't know if you're aware of those, John, but that
no, the one in particularly the one that sort of kind of, you know, missing that call up does now ring a bell. Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's really interesting because it does play into the mindset of a player who is hoping to represent one of global football's biggest powers in Brazil, and basically Brazil go into every tournament. You know, I would argue they're probably not. They're not, you know, amongst the favourites this time in reality. But you know, but in truth, the expectation levels are always sky high with them. Yeah. And even though they haven't, by no means, got a vintage squad, you know, when the World Cup comes around, who do you think of? You think about Brazil. Absolutely. And basically it's always this. And then, you know, for someone like Gabriel, it would be an absolute career ambition. And basically, you know, if that's in his head, that basically all of a sudden, if he, you know, if he thinks, oh gosh, you know, maybe I need a rest, maybe I need a break. But if I say that, then basically does that put my World Cup place at risk? Then that's what you're up against, really. And that's the, I guess, the mindset that I'd sort of kind of talk about in sort of, you know, when it comes around to players being fearful for their place. You know, it was quite interesting because in one of the earlier camps, when I think it was sort of last season actually, when the suggestion was that basically would England rest Declan Rice for the second game of the camp because we're onto it, and he basically mocked this idea, Thomas Tuchel, by saying, well, who's that going to benefit? Well, Arsenal. And then he immediately answered it and said, well, hang on a minute, you know, did they rest Declan Rice having beaten PSV, you know, basically 6-1 or whatever it was? No, they didn't, you know. So don't try and tell me that basically, you know, Arsenal want to rest him, you know. And basically, I think we sometimes make this mistake of completely overlooking the importance of playing for their country, to, you know, for the player. Yes, the clubs pay their wages. We know that, you know, for kind of, even for the bigger nations, but particularly for the bigger nations, it's no financial gain. It's much more about the kind of the pride of the shirt, basically wanting to play for their country. And I bet you that would be Gabriel's driving force, basically saying, I still have a fight on my hands, that basically to absolutely be sure that I'm in the World Cup squad.
Absolutely. And we'll hear from Mikel Arteta on Friday ahead of the North London derby, where he will, absolutely be asked questions about not just an update on Gabriel, but I imagine just his thoughts on also the fact that he's lost one of his key players during a friendly on the international scene. And we'll hear his feelings. Speaking of that North London derby, that is indeed what's up next for Arsenal. And one of the segments that we're going to bring to you, it's not just about, the current Arsenal team and the matches that are going on, but we are going to introduce something of a flashback segment, if you like, and play on a little bit of nostalgia, because nostalgia bait these days is one of the biggest things around in media, and certainly we're going to play on that. And so what we're going to do each week in our flashback segment is kind of talk about, with the game coming up, a key moment or a favourite game or just a key thing that we think about associated with this fixture. And John, we're going to kick off with you, where you're going to really challenge my historical Arsenal knowledge at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to take you all the way back to 1987. I think this was one of the most important fixtures and victories in the modern day Arsenal history. I really do. And for sheer drama and fairy tales and everything, it was, I think, still unparalleled in terms of North London derbies. And it was the Littlewoods Cup semi-final. It was over, as it still is. It was over two legs, and basically I was fascinated, by this kind of new George Graham team. George Graham took over in 1986, got off to a really good start. The team was sort of kind of flying, going well, and basically sort of rejuvenated. They just lost a little bit of impetus and momentum before that game. And then basically, particularly before the sort of the first leg at Highbury, which then Spurs win 1-0. And then basically, you can say, this is slipping away. Spurs were in the middle of a really good year. They went on to sort of kind of reach the FA Cup final, which they lost from City Coventry. And then basically, but they were scoring goals for fun. Clive Allen through the middle, absolutely everything funneled towards him. Brilliant. David Pleat built a really exciting team. And then, Arsenal are one down then in the return leg, and it's that's written into folklore, basically, because Arsenal 2-0 down on aggregate away from home at White Hart Lane. I may or may not have been in the away end, and basically, and at that point, you hear the kind of the announcement about tickets, which then becomes just folklore about how Spurs fans can get tickets for the Wembley final, basically, because they're 2-0 up and they think they're home and hosed. Now, I actually did something not so long back with John Lukic. I think it was before a North London derby last season, in which he recounted this story and how the players could hear it coming through the walls. And basically, George Graham basically just left it at that. Didn't need a team talk. Spurs getting carried away with themselves, basically thinking they're at Wembley was all the motivation that they needed. Arsenal came back, basically leveled up the tie and basically took it to a replay. The sort of kind of flicking of the coin in the middle, basically. They're back to White Hart Lane a few days later, which Arsenal fans, celebrated, because at that time they were basically, better at White Hart Lane than against Spurs than they were at home. So, and then what the amazing thing was that was on the Wednesday, and then the replay happened on the the second leg was on the Sunday, and the replay happened on Wednesday. Can you imagine now?
Madness, honestly. Imagine Mikel Arteta in a press conference trying to talk about that. Goodness me.
It's absolutely crazy. And so basically then Spurs take the lead again, and then the late show. And then basically, how Arsenal pulled it off right at the end. Ian Anderson and then David Rocastle. And David Rocastle, I have to say, it was my boyhood hero, and basically, I think Saka is the closest thing ever, really, to sort of kind of emulating that, and basically since, and it was just astonishing. But what I think that did for Arsenal was it was a really important time, and they hadn't won a trophy for a few years, and basically George Graham had shown great promise. And then basically catapulted them to the final. They won the Littlewoods Cup against the mighty Liverpool team of that time, and that ended in that Ian Rush scoring first record and everything like that, basically. And it made everything else that followed possible. People talk about 89 as their biggest thing, but I kind of think without 87, 89 doesn't happen.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. That's the logic of a kind of a, someone who follows a lot of football. Yeah. And that's how I think fans think sometimes. Yeah. And that's what it is. So I think in the grand scheme of things, of all the, North London derbies that I've witnessed down the years, I actually think that is perhaps the biggest, the most significant, and certainly the most dramatic.
Yeah, no, I think the butterfly effect in football is always huge. This idea if one incident doesn't happen, then these ones that I think I saw a piece of content the other day. It was like, if Steven Gerrard hadn't made this tackle in this game, Lionel Messi doesn't win the World Cup with Argentina. Like, it's amazing you can go back into all these timelines about how things needed to happen for this then to happen, because it was something to do with like Scaloni becoming a manager and obviously taking Argentina to the World Cup. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm so much more petty than you. That when it comes to North London derby moments, I'm just always about the petulance of enjoying a former Arsenal player who's decided to somehow pull on a Tottenham shirt, getting utterly and entirely bamboozled and annoyed and sent off. And that's why I'm taking fans back to 2012 in November, which as of today, November 17th, the exact same date that game took place in 2012. Arsenal beat Spurs 5-2, but obviously went 1-0 down, courtesy of Emmanuel Adebayor, only for then on the 17th minute to get sent off after what has to be one of the most derby tackles on Santi Cazorla you're ever going to see. Just high leg studs scrape down and he stands up like he's done nothing. Obviously, he's duly sent off, and Arsenal go on to win the game very comfortably. Gareth Bale scored a great goal in that game as well, I say with regret, but he's annoyingly one of those players that I always look back on and go, he's one of my favourite players to never play for Arsenal and annoyingly play for Spurs. But when he scored that goal, I was like, yeah, that's a player that's destined to go on to Real Madrid, because he's just so much bigger than where he is right now. But yeah, it was a great game ultimately that Arsenal ended up. It's not like one of those games you look at like with yours and you say that was a moment and then led to bigger things. And I know Arsenal went on to win, FA Cups during the 2010s and that season, the 2012-13 season, that they went on to kind of break that trophy drought that extended for 9 years. But it's just, for me, the derby, and it kind of bleeds into what we're going on to next, which is obviously this weekend's game. The derby, for me, it just all the noise, and for this season it's about Arsenal and the title, and for Spurs obviously it's about kind of a first season under Thomas Frank and how they're recovering from one of the worst Premier League finishes, but then obviously that was tied in with the Europa League victory to end a trophy drought. But all of that noise disappears, John, around the derby, because it's just become so blinkered and so closed in on the drama and the theatre of the North London derby, which I think for most, even outside of just Arsenal and Tottenham fans, is the greatest derby for me. And I'm biased, but I feel like many fans I speak to who aren't Arsenal and Spurs fans say the North London derby has got that essence that's never been lost. Other derbies, sometimes you see kind of those essences of the anger and the bite and the drama that's associated with them kind of do fade in some regards. But for this one, it always feels that way.
Yeah, I think we could talk all day about, I'm sure every fan of every club will say their derby is the best and the most fierce. Yeah. But I think Arsenal Spurs is particularly tribal, it's particularly raw, and it's basically everyone loses their head, basically, don't they? Basically, and it is fearsome, and it is, it's sort of, I don't know, it can get pretty poisonous and nasty and sort of fired up at times and gets pretty angry on the pitch. I mean, I do love, some of those games when Arsenal, were crowned champions, in the invincible season. I mean, the Spurs were so fired up for that game, because it meant so much for them. And I love that interview with Vieira and Henry in the tunnel afterwards with Jeff Shreves, I think, and basically they're sort of kind of talking about what it meant and kind of, how much.
Is it Tarico he was talking about? Like Tarico, is it Tarico that was saying like, celebrating in front of Henry, like, we scored, and he's like, we needed a draw to win in your place. Like, brilliant. Watch me at full time, he says.
It was good fun. And I think that's what makes those kind of ones special, isn't it? And basically really kind of gives it, some big impetus and some kind of fantastic rivalry, and I do think it's great. I could Liverpool Man U, those games, even though it's not sort of kind of geographic derby, then basically that's a big one. Southampton Portsmouth, completely random. That is poisonous.
Yeah.
That is bad. Liverpool Everton, bad. And then basically, but I do think Villa Birmingham is pretty horrific, and they're basically, they're great games, and I love the fire and the passion. And then sometimes you do get that upset. The 4-4 draw when Benny scored. I mean, no one saw that coming.
Honestly,
absolutely ridiculous game, that one. And then basically, so they're great, and it gives you it gives you this kind of fear in your stomach, doesn't it? I think the fans will feel it basically about, everyone thinks that team should win, their favourites, but the other one has always got a puncher's chance because it's so frenetic, it's so loud, so intense, and basically sometimes people just lose their heads a bit like Adebayor.
Yeah, and Spurs haven't won the derby since Harry Kane, of course, left for Bayern Munich. Arsenal have very much, dominated. They've won the last 3 in the Premier League. They've won 5 of the last 6 derbies that have been played against one another in the Premier League so far. And Arteta's really kind of got such a grasp on this particular game. And we saw in the pre-season game between the two, which is difficult ever to take kind of much from a competitive sense in a pre-season friendly, but I remember watching that game. I think it was at City. I can't remember what time it was. It was early hours. And I remember at full time, the Spurs players having won that game 1-0. There was such visual celebrations from genuine delight and fist punch in the air that they'd won this friendly. And I get it. I'm not taking the mick out of it. I'm not belittling it. But it kind of, in that sense, shows you what this game means. I think it's one of those derbies as well that when a player who obviously isn't a fan, like others are, players like Saka, of course, will naturally get it, having grown up being an Arsenal fan. But I think it's one of those derbies as well that if you ever end up playing for Arsenal or Spurs, it's one of the easiest hatreds to kind of grasp. I think there's a video of Bukayo recently leaving the Spurs training ground with Van der Ven where he's kind of asked a question about Arsenal and gives a very unpredictable response in kind of their hatred towards the club. It's just one of those that players kind of just get it immediately as soon as they begin to play. I remember there's that talk of Lee Dixon in the '89 documentary where he talks about he's basically put up against a wall by Tony Adams, who then explains and drills it into him what this derby means, and you get it just straight away. So when it comes to this Sunday, John, and this particular derby between Arteta and Thomas Frank, the first time the pair will meet in a competitive sense as managers of their now respective clubs, how do you see it going? Because they're probably the two teams that have experienced the most injuries of any other side in the Premier League this season, have lost countless players between them. And there's narratives now with Gabriel being out about who kind of Arteta brings in to replace him. Will it be Hincapié? Will it be Calafiori moving there? Or according to reports, is going to be okay for the weekend, but we don't know. Then Lewis Skelly could move then to left back, another player who absolutely understands the derby and loves it as well. So how do you see this one playing out?
Well, I do think it's got a really interesting backdrop with Spurs. I do live in North London, and basically I've got a lot of Spurs supporting pals, basically, a couple of which have, been season ticket holders since year dot, basically. They are so mixed on Thomas Frank.
Yes.
I've got another pal actually who basically has become a bit of a running joke now, because basically I'm thinking, hang on, they're doing quite well this season. And my perception is that it's quite healthy, And basically when Spurs were beating Man United, and okay, it was Saturday lunchtime, so playing ahead of everyone else. Crisis Club Tottenham, as they're now known between me and this guy, basically got up to second in the table.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm thinking, what are you going on about? But what it is the fundamental is that basically they're not convinced at all on the style of football. They have got major reservations and misgivings about the squad. And basically, Tell has been a bit underwhelming, to put it mildly. Simmons, basically, I think they were quite excited because they snatched him from Chelsea. It's not really, worked out for him yet. Richarlison's a bit hit and miss. You never know quite what you're going to get.
Romero,
an attacking sense, And basically, it's sometimes it's difficult, to kind of predict and sort of kind of see what's going to sort of kind of turn out. Really, I think Paulina's a really good signing. Really, really good signing. So the kind of pluses and minuses, and I've seen them, a couple of games you know, albeit on the telly, one against sort of kind of Wolves and then against Chelsea, when they were terrible, absolutely terrible. And you think, you know, the XG, for example, at home was so low. I think particularly against Chelsea, wasn't it? And it was really bad, and basically never looked like scoring. And it's been a bit of a mismatch. And yet they've had some decent results. They've been better away from home, definitely better away from home. Yeah. And you know, so I think they will pose a threat. With Frank, it's about moments. It's about set pieces. It's about you know, creating chances. We can't. They surely knew what they were getting when they appointed him, which was kind of this, you know, methodical manager at Brentford who got good results, but it wasn't always free flowing and, you know, entertaining football. I actually think he'll do all right at Spurs and potentially get him in the top 5/6 this season. I really do. So I think they're going to be a force, you know, to be reckoned with, and a sort of a danger for Arsenal. But I do think Arsenal. Yeah, it's a big week on the back of the international, you know, because it's Tottenham, it's Bayern Munich, it's Chelsea. Yeah. The way that they sort of dropped off a bit after sort of Sunderland, it was a disappointing one, wasn't it? The way that the game ended. Big test, I think, of mentality, and a big test of their squad and about depth as well.
Absolutely. I think that obviously it would have been a huge boost to win at Sunderland, and that goal that's considered right at the end is really easy to kind of look at that and maybe think, is that going to have, you know, lingered? Sometimes you want to play a game as soon as possible, you know, and an international break is the worst time to kind of drop points because you'd linger on it for a few weeks. But I think this Arsenal side have shown really good willpower to turn around kind of negative moments. Even when they went 1-0 down in that game, the second half performance was really good from Arsenal in Sunderland. You know, they really dominated the second half and arguably probably tipped the balance of the scales in their favour slightly. Ballard just had an unbelievable game. You know, did the block at the end even to stop Marino from winning it with his final touch as well was again stunning. And it's just seemed one of those games where Arsenal just weren't destined to get the result. But they have dominated the derby so much. It's actually, I'm surprised this that I mentioned, obviously, it's the first they haven't won since losing Harry Kane. It's the first derby that's not going to feature either of Harry Kane or Heung-min Son since 2014 in the Premier League, which is kind of also an interesting narrative. And Arsenal will lose a player in Gabriel, we expect. We're not expecting him to be involved in this one. From what we're gleaning from the reports that are coming out and certainly the information that's coming out, unless there's a big turnaround. And he has surprised us in the past, so, you know, don't 100% count him out, but he's been big for Arsenal in these derbies. I think he scored, you know, in multiple ones in recent season. The one obviously last season, 2 seasons ago, sorry, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, he scored in that 1-0 victory. And you got to get the sense that if Arsenal are going to get a result in this game, and the expectation is going to be, it's. I feel like the longer the game goes on as a stalemate suits Spurs obviously so much more. They're also unbeaten in every single, as you mentioned, their away form is really good. They've not lost an away Premier League game yet this season. So there's a lot in that Spurs tank that would kind of lead them to potentially being in a way of getting a result. But do you get the sense if Arsenal are going to win the title this season, there's no question they absolutely must win this game?
Yeah, I honestly think this is a defining week for Arsenal. I really do. I think the way that Sunderland game finished, it was almost as if Arsenal had suffered a massive blow to their kind of, title hopes. I was thinking, and look, I do think, Arsenal would have been hugely disappointed not to have won that game, because when you go 2-1 up, bearing in mind they'd not conceded in so long, you thought, well, they won't concede again. Yeah. So basically it's home and hosed, and so, but then they're still 4 points clear at the top. They've got a big margin of, the next big rival, if you like, which maybe is Liverpool. And so I think you need to kind of keep it in context. But having said that, if they then basically come off the back of that and then the international break, and as I say, Tottenham, Bayern Munich, and then Chelsea. So I think if you kind of come away from those 3 games with 2 wins and a draw, then I think all of a sudden everyone will be going, my word, Arsenal basically are these things. They are strong mentally. They have got depth of squad to cope with injuries, and sort of any setbacks on the international break. and then basically they are right in the mix for the title because they've got this mentality which screams, we're making a statement, we're coming back. But if they do have any disappointments in those games, and any setback, then all of a sudden it's sort of, it's licensed to kind of, for people being ultra critical, say, well, have they got the mentality after all, one little setback and, all of a sudden, the sort of kind of the wheels coming off slightly. So I don't think you can understand, not just Spurs, but also I think for the rest of that week, just the importance of this 7-8 days or so, really, over the course of the season. I think it will tell us a lot. And it could be a defining week for Arsenal season, I think. I really do.
There's absolutely no doubt. If you'd offered me 2 wins and a draw, but the draw was in the Bayern game, if Arsenal get a win over Chelsea and Spurs, I think that's absolutely huge.
Huge.
If one of those league games end in a draw, I still think there'll be some discourse around whether or not, because that'll be 2 games in 3 that Arsenal would have dropped points in the Premier League. So that still, I think, would raise a couple of questions, even though the difficulty of the opponents is definitely important in the context of it. It's just, for me, I'd look at those 3 games, and obviously we'll talk more about the Bayern game in next week's podcast after the derby's finished, and we'll have the knowledge of what's happened in that game. But I almost get the sense that after winning 4 from 4 in the Champions League, they can almost afford to kind of look at that Bayern game as one they can rotate players in, rest players for the Chelsea fixture away from home in a few days' time, because they don't have to win that Bayern game for the league phase. If it was a group stage match, it might be slightly different context. But because of the way the league phase works now, if you win 5 games in those 8, you're pretty comfortably going to be sitting most likely in those top 8 positions. And Arsenal have already won 4 from 4. The Bayern game for me is not necessarily a vitally important game, but it definitely is a game that still, if they were to get a positive result in, can stand out as a statement and provide the extra morale boost, momentum boost, certainly going into the Chelsea game. And Arsenal have got the depth these days to be able to rotate and still be incredibly competitive in those games too. I'm going to be mean and ask for a prediction, John. You don't have to go. You don't have to, go mad around the discussion of it. But even just a scoreline would be great.
Yeah, I'm a shocker at these. I reckon it'll end up as a draw.
Really,
I do. I think it'll be tense. I think it'll be nervous. I think Gabriel's a big blow.
Yeah,
and basically, I'm a terrible predictor, is what I'd say.
I hope you are.
Find this out.
I hope you are a terrible predictor for sure.
I travelled back from Albania with someone who covers Spurs a lot, and basically he said to me, "Don't be ridiculous. That will never happen. Arsenal will roll over Tottenham completely. They're miles better at Spurs. The squad isn't good enough." And by the way, he's not an Arsenal fan. He's not a Spurs fan.
Yeah. And so why don't you believe him?
And I basically said to him, yeah, but that derbies are never like that.
Yeah.
And basically that's my thinking. That's why. Yeah. That's why. Because I always think they're so tense. I mean, it was last season, wasn't it? When basically it was the midweek game.
Yeah.
When it was 1-0. I can't tell.
Arsenal came from
1-0 for a long
Trossard
time.
scored the winner. Yeah.
I can't remember a game which was quite so one-sided as that. And yet
there was no drama in that game. Even though Spurs took the lead, it still felt like it was inevitable Arsenal would still win it.
Yes.
It was so dominant. And even though it was 2-1.
That's the crazy thing. And then do you remember the 3-0, 3-2 game basically at White Hart Lane? Yeah. Well, I mean, Arsenal were on a totally different level.
Best half of football I think they've ever played, probably. That first.
Oh, really? Yeah. I couldn't disagree. Yeah. I think they were great, actually. Absolutely amazing. Amazing. And yet, how does that happen in the last 5, 10 minutes or whatever? Absolute nail biting. It's because of the derby drama, basically. So. Yeah. Go on. What's your prediction?
Well, obviously I'm going for a win because I'm an optimist beyond anything else. I think if Arsenal get an early goal and it just kills that element of Spurs kind of belief, and that's where if Arsenal get a goal within the first 20 minutes, I think you could easily see them kind of going to a second before the break. And if they've got a 2-goal buffer before half time, it could get really interesting. If Arsenal are going into this game at half time and it's still 0-0, or even if Spurs have got a slight lead, my confidence levels won't be like they were the season before, where we went 1-0 down and then just kind of went on to win comfortably. So it's so hard. I empathise with you completely not believing, from the Tottenham perspective of thinking that things are going to just roll over, because I agree so much that these derbies just remove all form, all thought process, all common sense just goes out the window with derbies. For the record, I don't like these games. I hate the derby with an absolute passion. It's my least favourite game of the season, because while I am massively optimistic, I'm also one of those that if Arsenal don't win the derby and Arsenal, God forbid, lose the derby, it's the worst day of our lives. So that's why I hate it, because while the high can be so high, the low is so incredibly low. That's why I can't stand these games. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. We're going to make it more of a feature in future podcasts to take more of your questions. And of course, I've not been able to in a previous podcast because there hasn't been an opportunity to ask you for. So I kind of speculatively put out a tweet and just said, would you like to throw in some questions? You can, of course, follow myself at Tom Canton Media on X. You can find John at John Cross Mirror as well. You can find me on Blue Sky as well at tomcanton.bsky.social. I think that's what it is these days. It's a difficult one to remember, the Blue Sky one. But I did ask you for some questions, and we did get some questions come in, thankfully. So thank you already to some of our early passionate listeners that are still yet to hear this podcast. But we'll jump into this one from at @dark_master5, who says, which striker, John, when all are fit, is the best fit for the current way that Arsenal play of Jesus, Havertz and Gyökeres?
Oh, that's really such a great question, I have to say. So I do love Havertz. I think he's silky. I think he's great, and I think he just links the play. He's sort of a bit. I love that fan, chant that basically goes up, 60 million down the drain, Havertz scores again. I mean, it's great, isn't it? Because he has defied the option. So you kind of balance that against Jesus. And I tell you what, a couple of people that I really sort of kind of know and love Jesus. And basically, I think Jesus was a big, big signing for Arsenal, wasn't he? When they got him from Man City, it was almost like a statement of intent. And I think people have forgotten just what a positive impact he's had as a player, but also as a kind of a really kind of sort of leader. And basically, he's got an experience sort of kind of winning head on his shoulders as well. So I think when he comes back, I think because when he got injured last season, he was in a really good moment. Yeah. And he was sort of kind of coming back and scoring goals. And I tell you what, Gyökeres, I've been very, very jury out on him. But when I sit in the press box, basically, there's a group of 5 or 6 guys across the sort of the kind of runway there, sort of kind of with the steps, and I have such a laugh with those guys. I love them to bits. Honestly, they make it really, really good fun for me to watch. And basically, they love Gyökeres, and I understand why, because he works so hard. And I'm going, I'm not sure about it. He's like, he's missing chances, doing this, that, and the other. And I think I made him man of the match against Crystal Palace because I thought he was terrific, worked his socks off. And basically, they probably convinced me round. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, he, the first 45 minutes, I wasn't there, but everyone said basically what a great game he had. It was his best performance, best half of football. And he was getting in the groove.
Burnley, he was brilliant. I think he worked hard, didn't he? Unbelievably good.
Yeah. So I think he's got that in his locker. Personally, I'd go Havertz. Yeah. But I think that Gyökeres has got so much of, basically about him too, like potentially, particularly in kind of breaking down those hard to win games. Put him on as a sub. Look to him to be something different from the start, basically. So I do think Havertz would get my overall kind of vote, really. But Arsenal needed a striker in the summer, and Gyökeres is a pretty good option, I think.
Yeah, I always said they needed a striker in the summer, but I never felt like it was the Declan Rice market for strikers that they had when they signed Declan Rice. Like, I know Isak was there, but even then, I looked at Isak at 100 and whatever million it was, and I thought Arsenal need to spend quite a lot of money on a lot of players this summer, and if you can get Gyökeres for, I think it was 53.5 plus 10 million in add-ons to get the deal done. I mean, you're looking at that and thinking that's a great deal, less than half of what Isak cost Liverpool, and arguably Gyökeres has been better than Isak this season, certainly from an Arsenal perspective. So I think if Arsenal are a Champions League final tomorrow, I'm starting Kai Havertz. I agree with you 100%. But I think that having Gyökeres in your locker, and I think Jesus coming back, he is a different. I asked Mikel the other week, I said, would Jesus back in training, what does he offer that's different? And the first thing he said is that he's got a hunger now. Like, he's had so many injuries that it's that mental side of his game. He's so desperate to return and get back into the fold that in itself is something that's encouraging about his game. But he is technically, I think, better probably than both with the ball at his feet. He's really good with the kind of close control and the Brazilian flair, if you like, that he's got. But I think Havertz just offers such a good all-round game to that centre-forward role for Arsenal that he is going to be such a massive returner for us. Speaking of returners, the other question that we had was more of kind of a newsy point of view from at AFC_10M, who said, what are the latest on kind of Gabriel, Ødegaard and Havertz's injuries? Because we touched upon the Gabriel element already. Ødegaard, just for the record, was with the Norwegian national side. I reported the story for the Mirror and FL this week that he turned down the option of a few days holiday to actually join up with the Norwegian national sides. And again, that kind of showed his attachment with that group and obviously the loyalty and the leadership qualities that he has. And he also obviously prioritised his rehab that way. Kind of spoken with Arsenal, and Ståle Solbakken and the Norwegian coach had to basically search permission from Arsenal to obviously for that to happen, and they guaranteed about the recovery process would still be very strictly followed. Havertz, we don't really have much of an idea yet about kind of when he's back, other than Arteta saying we hope after the international break. So, John, it's one of those I think we'll have to wait for Mikel's words on Friday.
Yeah. I think Ødegaard was really encouraging, actually, because I think there was a beautiful shot, wasn't there, where he was in some of the pictures from the dressing room celebration. I loved it. It. Honestly, that group is really together. And basically, talking to someone earlier was saying basically about how Norway could be a real danger, in sort of kind of almost the unfancied sort of kind of pot and seeds, and, could be a really dangerous team with so many talented players. And Ødegaard is just at the heart of that. Brilliant player. So he couldn't come back. But I think he's close, and I wouldn't mind betting also then that basically Havertz, we're still kind of maybe talking, towards the end of the month. But you've got to be back in the zone. And obviously Jesus has been kind of hinting, hasn't he, that basically he's back on the grass and really stepping up his work. So what a lift it would be if basically by, say, the Chelsea game, everyone was back in training. And you know how it works, that everyone's kind of got to be with the first team group and training with the first team group to be considered for the first team squad to play a game. So it's pretty obvious. I suppose it's pretty basic. Sort of, it seems an obvious statement to make, but sometimes it's easy to forget that you kind of got to be with the group to kind of, go through the drills, go through this sort of kind of, team and sort of set up and strategy to kind of actually be, let alone be fit, basically, to kind of be involved. So I'll tell you what interests me. And obviously Madueke, I think Madueke's really close too with Gyökeres, is that I just think we're about to enter about 2 or 3 months of a game every kind of few days, basically, at least 2 games a week. Once, sometimes it's once every 3 days. You've basically got all of your players basically back and fit and available. That I think is key and could be huge, I think, for the running, because Arsenal do have a depth of squad now. Looked a little bit blank again, didn't it, at Sunderland? But when everyone's back and fit, then you've got proper options from the bench. Martinelli is another one worth mentioning, isn't he? I think he was very close, before the international break. So actually, I think I'm sure that he's perhaps in contention for the bench Spurs.
The other one I think is also Noni Madueke as well. Yeah. He was also close to getting out. And I really liked what I saw from him before the injury. I thought he was dangerous. I thought he kind of showed something different as well. Like the amount of box entries that he had, when he was covering for Bukayo Saka, who was injured as well. It was almost like Arsenal didn't necessarily miss Saka as much as when obviously last season when he had that huge period of absence. It did feel like the gap between Saka and the next option has closed up so much more with Madueke's entrance into the squad. And I think obviously he offers something on the left and the right for Arteta to think about as well. So another option, and with so many games over the festive period, having these players back is going to be massive. We are going to leave things there for time purposes, but thank you so much, everybody that's tuned in for our first episode of Seeing Red. How do you think it's gone, John? Have you enjoyed it?
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah. Can't wait for next week already. No, really enjoyed it. I hope everyone else has too.
Indeed.
You have.
Yes, of course. Let's talk about Arsenal. What better thing is there to do? next week we'll be back, of course, breaking down our thoughts from the North London derby and looking ahead to those matches against Bayern Munich and Chelsea. You can find all of the written work, of course, that we produce on the Mirror and in football.london from my perspective as well. Anything to highlight that you might have coming up in the weeks to come, or are you going to keep it close to your chest, John?
I've got a nice interview to come, actually. Yeah, I better not say, but basically, a nice sort of kind of nice with a big Arsenal feel later this week. So that'll be good. And basically, I was also kind of trying to sort of break down who might be in sort of England's squad and long list for the World Cup. And I reckon Saka and Madueke are kind of, I reckon are ahead of Bowen there. But does Eze get in? Going back to that original point, So, yeah, I reckon there'll be a lot of debating over the next few days, on the back of that England get together. But yeah, I think we've got some decent Arsenal content to come this week, I reckon.
Make sure you check that stuff out. From a personal point of view, there's an interview out that I've got with Italian journalist Antonio Giordano, who, of course, is very much entrenched in the world of Napoli, and with Arsenal looking likely to bring in Maurizio Micheli, he's provided some insight into his work as a head recruiter at the Italian side, who's going to be, from my understanding, Andrea Berta's new right-hand man. So that could be an interesting one. So if you want to find that out, it's over on the football.london website as well. But massive thank you again to John for your time, mate. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back with you next week for another episode of Seeing Reds, the unofficial Arsenal podcast.